Okay, a lot of this I'm just going to eyeball. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a tick mark on the top and bottom of each of these braces. And like I said, I just kind of eyeballed where I want these things. And I'll take my square, just so that I have a reference for later. When you're using these squares, you always want to move the square to the pencil. And I've numbered these, each one of these braces, 1, 2, and 3. Because even though they're square, they will be slightly different. Now I've got these set back in place here, and I'm just going to take one more look at it before I start making my marks on these stringers here, or these braces rather, so that I can cut the bow ties out in the middle. And I'm going to start with those bow ties, and once those are let into the handle piece, this handle piece right here, and all these are cut out in the middle and set where I want them, then we'll later figure out where these need to go and cut the excess off of the sides, and they'll get dovetailed into these arms here on the side. Now to get started with the bracing here, I'm going to find the center of each one of these pieces, and I'm going to use that for my starting point to cut my bow ties or my double dovetails. So I'm using a center finding rule, which is a pretty handy tool to have around every once in a while. It'll get you pretty close, it won't get you exact. Well, we got some excess on both ends on all of these pieces of bracing here, so that'll give us some wiggle room, and the center finding rule will get us pretty close. Okay, now I need to determine how wide my bow ties are going to be, so I'm going to use a compass, and I'm just going to dissect this board's width by striking a half circle on one side and a half circle on the other, and then using my dividers, placing my the sharp point of my dividers right on that line that I made. So I'm going to take my dividers and put it right in the middle of where I dissected the width of this board with my compass, and I'm going to check it from both sides, and it's off by about 1/16 of an inch, so I'll move my dividers just a touch to get me right on, strike a line, and check it from both sides, and I'm right on. So now that'll give me halfway the width of that handle piece. So now I can take where I marked center on the braces and just kind of score a line right in the middle off of that center. And that'll give me the width for my bow ties, or double dovetails, whatever you call them. And that'll give me a real good idea where to start my square here. Now I'm using a pencil for these lines because I'll just use my saw and cut on the waist side of each one of these. Okay, now that I have my centers marked, which we did first thing here on our braces, I'm going to set my dividers for 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch off of both sides of that center, and that'll give me 1/4 inch in the middle. Okay, now that I have my 1/4 inch middle section here, I'm just going to go from the corner here, off of the width that we marked earlier, down to the mark that we scored with our dividers, 1/8 of an inch off the center. I'm just going to bring a line down here and do it on the other side. So this is what the look of the bow ties are gonna look like when they're finished. I got my lines marked out here, and like I said, I do this with a pencil because once it's all cut out on our braces, we're just gonna transfer and mark with a marking knife onto our handle piece. So this is what it should look like. Like I said, I went 1/8 of an inch on both sides off of center, and then I just went from the corner down to those 1/8 inch offsets on both sides of center, and that gives me that look. So to find your center with a marking gauge, just eyeball center, make a line, go to the other side, make another line. There's about a 1/16 inch gap there, so I'm going to dissect that gap by eye, set my gauge again, make another line on both sides, and you can see that I dissected my first line with my second line, which tells me that I'm on center. So now that we have our center on the width of our handle piece, we can go ahead and start from the top, which is the bow tie part of our brace, and just mark down with our marking gauge how much we need to cut out. Now we'll take and transfer our dimensions around the board off of the width of our bow ties. So I'm going to take these lines with my marking knife and just line it up the best I can on the inside of the waist there. Bring my line down to all the way down. Transfer it around. That way you have a good reference for your saw to start. Oops. The thing with marking knives is on that first cut you don't want to go too deep. Just kind of squirt nice and easy. You can see how my square moved on me that first time. I tried to go too deep right off the bat. So just transfer your dimensions on around the board until you get back to your starting point, which is where your bow tie is on top. And so we're going to cut our bow ties up here on top. So we want to take out the waist for the lap joint right here. marking out that waist so we don't miscut anything, and we're going to keep the top section where our bow ties will be cut out. So the first thing we want to do is go in and cut out this waist with a handsaw. Now, using my bench hook here, I'm going to go ahead and start my cut with my small veritas crosscut saw, and I'm just going to be mindful of where my critical areas are in this cut. And I'm going to cut quite a distance off of that waistline so that I can chisel up to it later on down the road if the fit's a little too tight. Now, to get this waist knocked out, I'm going to go at it with my chisel here. Just working with the grain here. Light taps and a sharp chisel is the key to this. Now, this is where the glory of those critical saw marks come in handy, because if you didn't establish your saw marks initially, you'd probably just go ahead and cut past your line, almost guaranteed, and really just kind of messes up your whole measurement. So I'm just going not quite down to the depth line here. Just knocking the majority of this waist out. We're going to go with this with our router plane, just taking small cuts until we get to our depth line. And with any kind of pairing or using these router planes, you don't want to pass all the way through, because you will blow out the far side, and you really don't want to do that. So just go halfway through. And adjust your depth just a little bit at a time, going halfway through and then going at it from the other side halfway through again. Now that we've got our depth established for the lap, we'll try to dry fit our handle piece in. And we did leave a little bit of room for ourselves to chisel out, so that looks like we were successful there. So I'll chisel out one side of the line, and we'll see where we're at after that. There we go. Got a nice tight fit on that, and Now we'll go ahead and cut out our bow tie. So to cut out these bow ties, I'm going to use my benchtop vise, which is it's what's called a Moxon vise, or a lying press, or a bookbinding press, whatever you want to call it. But I just call it my benchtop vise, and I use it for cutting dovetails because it brings my work up off the bench perfect, so that my arm stays parallel to the piece that I'm cutting. So I've got this piece in here, and I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to rough it out with a dovetail saw, being mindful of where my critical lines are, so that I can chisel them out later, because you don't want to cut right to those lines initially. So I'll just get a good idea where I need to start. We got our bow ties roughed out now. We also have our lap joint finished on the back side, so when you finish that up, you should have a dovetail on top halfway through, and then a lap joint. So give it a good test fit before you start cutting your next pieces. Fits pretty good. Once we get these saw marks chiseled off here and smoothed out, we'll use a marking knife and transfer these bow tie dimensions onto our handle piece. Now to clean up these bow ties, I'm just going to secure my my brace here in the bench hook, and I'm going to cut down across the grain with a real sharp chisel. Now these are going to get undercut ever so slightly, so that they fit nice and tight down inside of that bow tie joint. Now that we have our bow ties cut out, we're just going to hold these real secure and make our way around our cuts with the marking knife. Before we go at this with saw and chisel, we're going to want to determine how deep into our handle piece we want to go. And the way I'm going to do that is just to take one of my cut pieces and set the marking gauge right to the bow tie itself. And then I'll come along these and set my depth. And I'm going to use a saddle square to establish the walls of these cuts, keeping the bevel of the knife once again on that waist side. So I'm just skipping every other one so that I can flip it. To get our recess cut out for the dovetail, or the bow tie rather, to slide down into, I'm going to go at this with a chisel and hammer. So I'm going to set the chisel right into the line that we made with the marking knife and give it a few taps to set it in. Do this on all 4 of these lines. Being careful not to go too deep, because it will, the farther you go, the more the wood rises up into the bevel on this chisel, and it'll push it back into the wrong side of the wood. So now that we have those lines, we'll just go at this with a small chisel and just take out a little bit of waste there, so that our saw can ride right inside of that groove. Now that we have those lines established and a nice groove for our saw to ride in, we're just going to cut down to our depth line that we made with our marking gauge. Now, just using a chisel and going across the grain, you'll see the magic of how these overlapping saw lines work for you. Just using the palm of my hand, I'm going to push a chisel in and just break those off little by little. Working my way down to within about 1/8 of an inch of that depth line that we marked. These bench hooks are really nice for paring, as well as sawing, of course, but I use them for both. I got these bench hooks here from Bad Axe Toolworks. Whenever I got a saw off of them, they sent this set of bench hooks along with the saw. So I'm just going to use my narrow chisel to get back in here. Then we'll go at this with the router plane to finish it up. There's a lot of different ways to hold stock. I find the quickest, securest ways are always the most efficient, of course, but that's kind of obvious. I see a lot of complex jigs and that type of thing, but I find that I can do probably 98% of the work I need to do without a jig, and just my bench hooks and my bench dogs and that type of thing. So, and especially my vise. So here I'm just getting in there with my router plane. And this router plane is nice because it'll give me a controlled depth of cut, unlike paring, which can get a little funky sometimes, and it's never really as square as you want it to be whenever you pare. But I find that this router plane does a very good job of giving me a nice square bottom to most of these types of cuts. I'm using a spear point blade on this, which is convenient because it gets into these dovetail corners real nice. Well, we got everything cut, chiseled out, and it's time for the final dry fit to make sure everything looks right before we proceed with the rest of the build here. Got a good fit there. We was looking for these braces to sit a little proud of our handle piece, and it looks like that's going to happen. So it looks like it fits quite well. So I'm going to put a triangle right here, so that after I take this apart, I'll know which way this bracing needs to be oriented inside of this handle stock. And these ones here I fitted earlier and already marked those. So we got a nice tight fit on all three of those braces. Alright, so to conclude part one, I'm going to glue on these walnut blocks here. And my plan for these later on down the road after the glue sets up is to shape these into the shape of what a bow door would have roughly. Let me grab another clamp here. So what I was saying was I'm going to give this a shape of a bow door after the glue sets up. And I figure that'll be nice for hand placement during the stirring of the mash. I'm just using a waterproof glue, which is also resistant to heat, because the mash will also be hot. Just wiping off my excess here with a damp cloth, because it's hard to get that stuff off later, and it's not too healthy for your edge tools. So nice tight clamp here. You're looking for even squeeze out all the way around that joint.